Call our joint meeting to order. I invite you all to join us in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Or at least for most.
So thank you all for coming to this joint meeting of the Planning Board and the Falmouth Board of Selectmen. Our agenda item tonight is to interview a candidate for the vacancy of the Planning Board and to vote to appoint the candidate. This will be a term ending in May of 2017 to fulfill the unexpired term from Ralph Herbst's resignation. Just to give you an idea of the way the process works, we'll have the interviews, at which point after we've heard the interviews, I'll accept nominations. If we have, at some point, there may be a motion to close the nominations. Once we do that, we'll then have a vote. The winning candidate must receive 6 votes of ours, because it must be a majority of those people eligible, and there are 10 people eligible to vote, so it must be a majority, and so 5 out of 10 wouldn't do it, so it's 6. If the candidate does not get 6, we would then have to entertain a motion to withdraw someone from the nomination and get it down to where we might be able to get 6 votes for one candidate. Just give you the ground rules before we get started. Okay. So what we'll have to do is interview, and the Planning Board or the Board of Selectmen may have questions for each candidate and make as much information as we need to be able to make our decision. And so if we'll start, please, with David Haddad. If you introduce yourself and tell us why you'd like to fulfill the term on the Planning Board, please.
Good evening. Thanks for having me here. I just first want to say that I'm passionate about planning and being on the planning board. Like I think you, Doug, and I know Megan, I grew up in this town. I chose to have my family raised in this town, have a home here. Most of you know that I ran for the planning board last year. At that time, I got to speak with Bob and Doug on a lot of things here about their experiences, their ideas regarding planning. Shared some of mine. I appreciated theirs. I think they appreciated mine as well. So when Ralph got elected this year, I thought to myself, this is a good time for me to put my name in there. Gives me a chance to fill a vacancy that Ralph was leaving without running against somebody I respect. I respect these members of the board, and I want to be a part of that team. I also want to add that, you know, one thing Bob and others often say, they want to be a part of planning for this community, creating a roadmap to see how to get this community growing, and 50 years from now, see what it's like. They wish they could come back. I want to try to do that same thing. I think Megan probably going to be the only one that's going to reach that goal, but we'll give it a whirl. What else would I like to? I also spoke with Pat regarding the local comprehensive plan while I was running. Spoke to her about, you know, how that process works, how that's going, and I spoke to just recently. She said, you know, they're pretty much wrapping up, and I know the planning board met with the Board of Selectmen regarding, you know, now the next step, you know, finishing up those different elements. So, you know, that's good. What else did I want to add here? I've been a town meeting member since 1997, 4 years on the Zoning Board of Appeals. I was, as I think most of you know, I was the chairman for a year. I served with Ken Foreman, who was chairman of the planning board. He served with me on the Zoning Board of Appeals. He was a chair at one point. And one thing Ken often said, that he wished that the planning board members could first be members of the zoning board before they jumped on the planning board, just to see how the bylaws, how they affected the community, the different, you know, decisions that we make. And I, you know, quite frankly, agree with Ken. But with regards to zoning, planning is not just zoning. Planning's using our town resources, our town personnel, the town planner, our county resources to try to make a good decision, you know, tackling the facts. So hopefully you put me on. I'd really appreciate it. If not, you know, get me out of here in 2017. It seems short-lived for such a lengthy process, but I hope you put me in there. I promise I won't let you down.
Questions from the board? Ms. Moran?
I do. I have 2 questions. The first one is, could you say in essentially a paragraph what your vision for affordable housing is in the town? And secondly, I'd like to know your view of the proposed Marriott proposal, I forget what it's called, Spring Hill or something.
That's, okay, as far as the affordable housing goes, I think we have an excellent affordable housing committee now, you know. Affordable housing is desperately needed. We haven't reached our limit, so that's good that we're working towards that, and quite frankly, I think the planning board should take up the leadership to gain more affordable housing where possible. I think I spoke during the election that I'd like to see mixed use used, vacant buildings more used for affordable, that sort of thing. And as far as the Marriott goes, that's going to be something that we're going to address, so hopefully I'm going to address them when I'm on the planning board, so I'd really not like to speak too much on that, but I will just look at the facts, listen to my fellow planning members, tap the town planner and use my resources, go through that file. I had a perfect attendance for the zoning board. I'll bring that same effort to this, so.
Thank you.
You're welcome, sir. Thank you.
Questions?
Do you have any feelings about the current discussions the planning board's having about the coastal resiliency and the concerns that we've been raising about the coastline?
I do. It's funny that you mentioned the coastal resiliency. I think the three of us were up there and we were all looking at each other like, I think we're on the same page here. But what you were saying, Doug, I just want to echo what you were saying as far as the infrastructure, high tide mark, you know, that's, you know, the roads, raising the roads, that could be a possibility. But one thing, you know, I was really concerned about is the FEMA maps and how those are going to change. I don't want to see Falmouth look like Nahant, basically, you know, houses way up in the air. So hopefully we can massage the bylaw a little bit, so you know, look, you know, bulk when you're driving down the road, like, you know, where did this come from? So,
Okay, thanks.
thank you.
How do you feel your profession helps appointment on the planning board?
Is my past
Your profession, yeah.
I think I was able to, I retired from the Sheriff's Department, so I think, you know, just handling different aspects that popped up there. You never knew what was going to happen on a certain night, but my supervisor relied on me a lot because I was level-headed and, you know, could, pardon the pun, roll with the punches, basically.
There are a lot of punches from this group, so it's good to be able to deal with that.
Probably take a lot of them. But yeah, you know, and I had a good rapport with my supervisors and, you know, always sought out their expertise when there was, you know, something arose that I wasn't quite sure of, and I just continue that to this day. You know, and what I try to do is not only see what, you know, you might end a hearing and say, okay, that's all, but I try to see what the end result is. I always drive down the road saying, geez, that could have just been a little bit better if that was a little bit set back a little bit more, or that was, you know, this, that, or the other, whatever the circumstances are. You know, there's always a way you could tweak it, but that's how you learn. Just learn as you go. You know, no one has all the right answers. Not every decision's a A+, that's for sure.
Any other questions for Mr. Haddad? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, folks.
Next we hear from Mark Cool.
I apologize for my flip-flops. I had kind of a burn accident over the weekend, so I apologize. So, I guess the question is, why do I want to be on the planning board? So, hopefully to avoid this question, I've intentionally not chosen to be reassigned on the zoning board after participating for 3 years, because the zoning board did enlighten me, and I appreciated the time, and I think I did a good job. But what it did make me come to realize is zoning board is interpretation. And so I think I can provide benefit to my community by developing bylaws that are creative and more constructive. So that's why I left the zoning board. I attended the planning board Concom joint meeting the other day, and what struck me to really bring it home with regard to want to be on the planning board was knowing the LCP and the coastal resilience element. Mr. Leary brought up the conservatory bylaw, and I think that template, how we're moving with regard to coastal resiliency and conservancy bylaw potentially, is how it's supposed to work. You have goals and action items in your elements. I think this is truly with a critical issue of coastal, or with our climate reality that's bearing down on Cape Cod, something that hones itself in this direction is going to benefit the community for years to come. And so I think that the conservatory bylaw that Chatham has could act as a model, and it could be more than just for coastal resources and coastal concerns. I think it's multifaceted with application. So my point is, I got excited when Mr. Leary brought that up, and I'm saying, jeepers, you could really apply this to all the elements in the LCP, or variations of. So I think that's a critical step in the right direction with regard to the conservancy bylaw, at least that consideration, because it forces the community, and this is, due to finances or otherwise, it forces the community and the planning board and other associated boards to consider our vulnerability assessments that are all tied to the economy, all the list of LCP items. My, of course, favorite is the land use regulation portion, land use. But the strategic goals and objectives in the town are changing, and it's being forced upon us more rapidly by the climate reality that we're undergoing. But as we envision and as we plan, I think it requires a lot of creativity, a lot of innovation, a lot of leaning on resources that are out there. But most importantly, I think what has to be built by the community, by the town government, by the planning board, is a coaxing of the community to get on one page, to move in the directions. And so I think, hopefully, as much as I talk, and as committed as I am to affordable housing, I think I could be a beneficial member to the planning board.
Questions for Mr. Cool? Ms. Griffin?
What do you consider, was limited to, the most challenging issues that you see facing the planning board, say, in the next 3 years?
Outside of the litigations?
Yeah.
From the standpoint of being on the planning board, you're going to have various plans come before the board, but I think there's a general concern that with this coastal resiliency element complete, and if taken to heart, there has to be a concerted effort on a multitude of levels that directs smart growth, where Falmouth and where the community and where the planning board wants it to move. so as to be effective in resource management, town resource management, effective in all the other LCP items economically. So I would say, try to snip it in the butt, would be to how do you get those action items implemented into play? And I think, largely because of financial obstacles, but I think that needs to be done, and that's probably going to be the larger obstacle or hurdle for the planning board in the near future.
Questions?
Sure. You mentioned litigation, and you also mentioned your interest in affordable housing, and obviously with your, sense of planning and just really forward thinking. I'm just curious what kind of obstacles or conflicts you might see comparing efforts with affordable housing as compared with efforts with planning.
Well, I don't think there's a difference. I think it has to work in concert. Affordable Housing Committee is reliant upon, we're advisory to the selectmen, but we're reliant upon planning staff and the planning board for support in developing more affordable housing, or mechanisms by which, case in point, I'm not going to babble on. Case in point is the housing production plan. It's been, it needs revision. So to do that, the planning board has to be a big supporter of us to get that accomplished. Don't really know what the obstacles are financially, but the intent is there. After the housing demand assessment study, I think, and after the Falmouth Enterprise little blurt out today in the paper about workers having, work wanted signs in downtown Main Street, I think the message is very, very vividly clear that workforce housing is necessary. On that wave, then the planning board has to discuss how are we going to get that done. And so you have housing elements that are very pertinent. It's just a matter of let's push. Let's put the feet to the fire on these action items. So that's how I see the planning board acting.
Okay, so and just to follow up, to really get to the crux of my question, do you see the possibility that some may see a conflict of interest with respect to your appointment on planning, since you're suing the town, versus, say, with affordable housing being a little bit more of a specific, unrelated area to the suit?
Mm-hmm. The suit is a rather specific issue. If and when, in the event of being put in a position of weighing in on another zoning or application for a wind turbine in town, which comes before the planning board, I would certainly give great consideration to recusing. The last thing I want to do is give an appearance of conflict, because it works to the degradation of the board's effectiveness. So that would be my position there. But planning has many, many broader issues, and I'm sure you're aware. And I think just on those issues alone, the vast majority, I could be effective.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I want to ask the same question. How does your professional experience, how would that be a benefit to the planning board?
Professional experience, 33 and a half years of air traffic. The aptitude of a controller has to be very creative, and you have to think on your feet. Planning board is similar in the sense that creativity is probably at the, you have rules and regulations, But for future envisioning, how do we get to where we want to go in 50 years, that takes a lot of creativity. And I respect the board members that sit on the planning board, and I think they have the aptitude for that. I believe I do, and I would hope that I would be appointed so you can exercise that.
Any other questions from the board? Yep, Bob?
Mark, could you give one example, since you've been on the zoning board, of a bylaw that you see would be changing? Just anything random, it doesn't have to be affordable housing or coastal resiliency or anything, but, I'm sure you've probably seen something. That
Yes.
We need to change this.
I can't, off the top of my head, tell you the name or the number, but what it deals with is nutrient loading. I think for the benefit to make it easier on the zoning board members and make it easier for applicants, if there's more of a defined metric that can be provided by Woods Hole, MBL, I think that would benefit not only the applicant as well as the zoning board, but then you're not getting tied up in appeals, and I think the clarity would benefit everybody, so the petitioner and the permit process would be expedited. Right now, that's kind of a foggy area for the zoning board.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Next, we'll hear from Mary Pat Flynn.
Good evening. You're probably wondering why I'm doing this so soon. But it isn't that I'm overwhelmed, believe me, and it isn't that I feel like I have to be involved with the town to survive. But I saw this as an opportunity to participate in the planning process with a board that I think has been very effective and very successful over the years. And it's a short-term appointment at this time. Not that I would not be interested in following up as an elected official at the end of the year. But I thought about doing this because in my experience, my education, I think in my experience, has given me a lot of preparation for a position like this. I worked in hospitals for 18 years. I was a nursing director. I had 800 employees, and believe me, planning was about half the job for me. So I know how important planning is. And in each hospital where I did work, we were always involved in a building project of one kind or another. And we were also looking at ways in which that hospital could meet the needs of a community, and how do we do that? And how did we really assess the community to know whether or not the hospital was really meeting the needs of the people? So for me, working in a position in a business or in the public sector that has community involvement is something that I have always really, is what I've always done. So I thought about this because planning interests me, also the town itself and what it is and what it looks like. Some of you may remember about 20 years ago, with Eric Turkington at the helm, we did a sense of place to take a look at what people thought about the town. What does it look like? What does it mean? What do you think about it? What are you happy with? What would you like to change? And then some of you may have been involved in that. I don't recall exactly, but there are a lot of people involved in it. And then 10 years later, we did a follow-up sense of place to see whether or not how things changed and how the town changed. And now we're doing it again. We're creating another group to do a sense of place, which is more like 13 years after the last one. But the idea is to have an open forum where people can come together and just talk about their community, what it means to them, how it serves them, how it serves their needs. So when I look at the planning board, I think this is a bit of a change from being in an executive position as a selectman, but planning is always part of every job. And I know the planning here is strictly governed by bylaw, and I understand that. But at the same time, it's an opportunity for me to kind of take a different look at the town and find another way in which to work with people who, with a different purpose in mind. And that's kind of where I am. I think we're so blessed in this town to have boards that are smart, that work together, that respect each other, and that get things done. And I saw this as an opportunity for me, and I'm not, kind of, sugaring you all up or something like that, but it's true. But planning is kind of something that I have always done, that's been important to me. I know the value of planning, and I know how important it is in how we get results and what we do with the results that we get, and if they're the right ones, and how we fix them if they're not. So, and I think that's what you do. So that kind of impels me to consider this, or ask you to consider me.
Questions for Pat? Pat?
Well, again, what do you consider the, no more than two, greatest challenges that the planning board should or will be looking at in the next 3 years to 5 years?
Well, I think, I look at build-out and density, because I think when you really look at land use in the town, how much land do we really have left to develop, and where is that land? How can it possibly be used, and should it be? Or should it be protected? And if we have to grow, how do we grow? Do we grow through density, which is, I think, in many places on the Cape, people don't want to think about, because when they think of density, they think about going up. And right now, we could go up 2 floors. Could we go up 3 floors? I don't know. I think that's a great community discussion as to how we deal with the growth of the community. And what was the other part of your question? I forgot.
Just what do you consider the two, no
Well,
more than two?
I think that's a major issue, and that impacts the other issue I see that we have, and that's coastal resiliency. What are we going to do to protect our community from storms, from weather changes, which we know are going to happen in the future? And we are vulnerable. We know that we have already experienced the results of storms with Hurricane Bob back in the mid-'90s. I lived on the water then, and happened to be in a position to be affected by Bob. And then we had, and also the effects on Surf Drive. And Surf Drive is, sea level is fast exceeding the land that we have there now. I mean, it's going to be underwater fairly soon. So I see the issue of growth and density and the issues of coastal resiliency as two really important items for the board.
Yes, Fran?
Sure. I have 2 questions. One is, how would you see your experience with Cape Cod Commission benefiting Falmouth in terms of a position on the planning board? I'll let you answer that first, then I'll go with the second.
Okay. Well, I am the county commissioner's representative on the Cape Cod Commission, so I don't represent a community. But and it's really kind of by default. If nobody else, there's only 3 of us, so somebody has to do it. And that was kind of how I got there. But I've been very grateful to be there. I've been there 6 years now on the commission, and I've learned so much about the Cape, and so much about the other communities and the issues that they have and how they deal with them, and how the commission has the capability of providing a great deal of support and knowledge and experience to towns who want to use them. I mean, you don't have to. You can request, and we've had the reset team here in Falmouth over at Little Pond, so we know the value of the commission. And it's given me, I think, not only an understanding of Falmouth, but a huge understanding of the Cape as a whole, and how we have to protect. Most of the greatest problem we have is our water supply, and how we continue to provide drinking water to all the people who live here.
So my second question is, with your experience, long-term experience on the Board of Selectmen, in the background. It's, it's been evident recently, and certainly no secret, that certain of the boards, have different views of certain issues. Planning may disagree with ZBA on certain issues. Planning may disagree with, the selectmen's strategic plan, or, be looking more to the future on certain issues. How do you think your experience with the Board of Selectmen might help to, kind of mediate and really expedite all of those goals of the various boards in moving Falmouth into the important needs of the future, whether it be through coastal planning or affordable housing or in any other subject that you choose?
Well, I think without attempting to impose my ideas and beliefs on anybody else, I certainly have gained an enormous amount of experience since I've been on the board with a hiatus. I actually had a 5-year hiatus since 1993. And prior to that, I was on the Personnel Board. Probably nobody even remembers that we had a Personnel Board. But that's when the selectmen were full-time. And they didn't deal with personnel. There wasn't even much of a charter back then. So the Personnel Board actually handled all of the employees. We interviewed people, we negotiated contracts with the unions, we did all that sort of thing. So I've had a lot of time to think about how the town has been managed over the years, how it has grown over the years, what some of the needs are, but I'm not one to impose any of my beliefs or my thoughts or telling people what to do, but I think the fact that I've been able to learn a lot as a selectman and learn a lot about the workings of the town, about the legal aspects of the town, how it needs and can be managed, the finances of the town. I think being able to just know in the back of my mind that I understand that, but I've also been enormously interested in land use for a very, very long time, but never had the opportunity to really put that interest to work. And I see that this is the time to do that. And with the commission, I've acquired, sometimes through osmosis more than anything else, a lot of information about land use and a lot of information about what other towns do and how they deal with the same issues that we have. And I think just without imposing any ideas or anything like that, but just being able to contribute to the dialogue and maybe to bring resources that maybe others hadn't thought about to the board as we move through these really difficult issues, because we have to come to grips with the idea of density, and we have to come to grips with the coast.
Thank you.
Yeah, Bob?
Pat, what gets lost in the conversation about housing in Falmouth is jobs. We need to do something about bringing good-paying jobs to Falmouth. So I was wondering, what can the planning board do to improve job opportunities and growth in town?
You're really right. They go together. Housing and jobs. You can't have one without the other. You can't bring in jobs if they're coming from, no matter where they're coming from, whether they're coming from the growth of the town or they're coming from outside. But if you don't have the housing, you're not going to have the jobs. And I thought that the housing study we had done with Barrett, what was her name? Judy Barrett. Was a really good thing, and it probably wouldn't hurt to bring that back out again and take a look at it and see what the recommendations were from that and kind of assess where are we now based on what she saw at the time and recommended at the time. But I think that there's a way that they should be addressed together, because I don't think they can be addressed separately, because they are just completely tied together. And when we look at, there's an interesting person that was just hired just a few months ago by the Realtors Association of Cape Cod. And he's sort of a housing zoning kind of specialist. He came from the south, from I think north of South Carolina. And he was there as a resource to the Board of Realtors, but he could also be a resource to communities, and he's even offered some of his thoughts on how people in the South have dealt with some of this. And I think sometimes that would be a good thing for us to do, not only to look at it from our own perspective, but how have others dealt with this in other places. But I think there's a way to bring them together, the issues of housing, the issues of density, the bylaws. I think they all have to be together in the same discussion, I think, to have a reasonable and useful outcome.
Sam?
Well, that's kind of an opener to my question. How you served on the EDIC for a lot of years. I mean, is there experience that you gained from serving in that capacity that you can bring to the planning board?
Well, I started with the mayor of Boston, Mayor Collins, who developed the city of Boston in his time, which was really quite an experience. Yes, that was 1993. I had just been elected selectman, and somehow the board said, well, you're on the EDIC. I said, okay, so I went down to the meeting, and I sat with a group of people that were just incredible. And he was one of them, and Dick Campbell, and a few of the others. Just tell me your question again.
Well,
I don't want to get sidetracked.
I'm asking whether there
on my
are
experience on the
things that you
EDIC.
learned on the EDIC that you could actually use as
Right.
part of the deliberation of the planning board.
Well, our sole purpose at that time was to develop the tech park, because it had been donated to the town. Eric Turkington was somehow involved in that as a state representative. And the whole idea was, here we have this technology park, and we have to develop it, because it was just, there was nothing there. And so what we did was, we actually hired a realtor, a person who was a realtor, but he was also really smart, I think, when it came to development, and he worked with us, and we developed plans of how we could market that park, and how we could, and what kinds of businesses were going to be important for Falmouth. So, it's so long ago, I hardly remember all the details, but I know we did a lot of community meetings, bringing people in and talking to people about what to do with the park. And we had a fabulous lawyer, Pat Butler. I don't know if any of you remember him. He has since passed away, but he was our attorney helping us with the land use. And we were able to attract companies. The other thing, one of the first things we did was to help Benthos. They had all this land out there that they were land rich and poor in other respects. And they wanted us to help them sell that land. So we helped them develop that Edgerton Drive. So that was one of the first things we did, was to bring companies in. And we just went out and recruited companies and went and utilized our scientific institutions. Because at that time, there was no place for them to go. So we worked with MBL and Hui. We had meetings with them off and on. We encouraged them with some of the scientists, and some of the lots we sold were to scientific companies from here, and some are still there. So we tried to utilize the people we had here rather than trying to bring people in from the outside. So how we would do it now would probably be, I'd have to really think about that, but it'd be a different approach.
Questions? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And now Pamela Herting-Barrett.
Thanks to follow here.
This is going to be a very difficult night.
I guess. So as some of you know, we're about to reach our 10th month anniversary of being Falmouth residents. Don't have a history here. But started in my prior life town of the town of Acton on the planning board. And big difference between the two towns is the Board of Selectmen, because the planning board is an appointed board, the Board of Selectmen, because commercial use is usually pretty political, as are 40B, so the Board of Selectmen did the site plans for the any commercial development. So I never sort of ended my planning career. I find it one of the most interesting boards, actually, in a town, because you have the potential to lay out the future of your community through planning. And the intricacies between transportation, affordable housing, the education you provide for your young people, and what is it that you have here that will draw young families back to the Cape, since so many of them have exited. And being on the Affordable Housing Committee has really given me some insight into many of the issues here. Without affordable housing, we can't bring people back. You need the jobs so that people can get paid enough in order to afford any of the housing. And you need a transportation loop that can enable people to come here, maybe cross the bridge, be picked up, taken to a job. So there are lots of intricacies, I think, for planning. Acton is clearly not a coastal community, so that was not, was not an issue for my town. But working for the Environmental Protection Agency, I did community outreach. I was in the Office of Public Affairs, and they hired me because I was a psychologist, and they thought that they could send me into very angry communities that had Superfund sites, and that I could somehow appease their anger toward the Environmental Protection Agency that had nothing to do with how the town became contaminated to begin with. So I think I have just a weird skill set. I don't know. I think planning is intricate. I think you have to think outside of a box. I think I'm a big proponent of a master plan, different than the LCP, Local Planning Initiative, yes. But we formulated a master plan with many of the things that Pat talked about, with community input from all the stakeholders, businesses, residents, schools. And we brought everyone together to see what we wanted, what was the future of Acton going to look like? What did we want it to be? We didn't have a town center like you have. We had Concord envy because of that, because Concord had a beautiful town center. It's not all that funny. It was very heartbreaking, actually, for us. So, where could we then create a town center? And we looked at this one major intersection and decided we could do something with that. And we brought in MAPC, which charges nothing or very little, always being very aware, obviously, of the financial implications of anything we did. And we called it the 2020 visioning process, and we brought, hundreds of people together that split up into groups, and we had charrettes, and you could take a sticky and put, what do you want to see here, and what do you want to see here? And the input was phenomenal. I'm a big proponent of bringing your stakeholders together. I think you can't build businesses unless you know what your businesses need. I think if you want a hearty and healthy school district, you have to bring children into the schools. You have a declining population of school-aged children, and you don't want to have to shutter your schools because that's painful. So I see, from an outsider perspective, I see very different things than probably had I lived here forever. What I can say is, I love this town. I think this is one of the most wonderful communities anybody could live in. And I'm not saying it to flatter you, because I'm staying here. And you may come and go, but we're going to be here. We love it here. And it's not just because we're less than a mile and a half from Old Silver Beach, and it's not because I can't drive a half a mile without seeing water, but the people here have a vibrancy and a commitment to this community, from your Woods Hole community to every aspect of this town. So those of you who have sat on boards have done a spectacular job. And I think for me, I love this town and I'd like to be part of that. But I don't have a history here, very upfront. But I love serving on the committees that I'm on. And I think when you bring in a different perspective, sometimes it shakes things up a little bit. I'm not pushy. I'm not looking to change what the town is. But I do have probably some very different ideas, and I'm not shy about sharing them, and I'm not so sensitive, that if you say, please be quiet, we don't want to hear that anymore, it's okay. Been told that before. So that's who I am, and that's what I'm all about, and if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them.
We've heard most candidates indicate that housing is probably the biggest issue. And inevitably, affordable housing gets attached to the word housing, affordable. There is a county formula that gives you what is considered affordable. What do you consider affordable? How would you calculate it?
I think what I consider affordable is very different than what other people might consider affordable. I think people living on fixed incomes have a view of affordability that's different from someone who inherited or who grew their own wealth, who can come in and buy a $500,000, $600,000, $700,000, $800,000 home. I think my balance for affordability is I look at young families, I look at minority groups who may want to come in. I think diversity is critical for every community, and we certainly have diversity here. But affordability isn't whether it's $100,000 or $200,000. I can't believe some of the state housing formulas for what they consider above and below the poverty level. I think it's very dependent on the community. You can't buy a decent house in the town of Acton for what you can buy a house for here, but the taxes are 4 times more than they are here. So on one hand, your tax base is low. The housing is not inexpensive, but you can find, I think, quite lovely homes for a reasonable amount of money. So I don't know how I can answer that in a way that sounds in any way erudite, because I think it's very dependent on who are you looking to bring in here. If you're looking to bring in retirees, that's wonderful. But if you don't have those young people, you won't even have the home health aides to take care of these retirees that are going to continue to gray here. So I think you need a balance, and I think the balance is tipping to those of us who are beyond 50 anyway. That was good, huh?
Pamela,
Yes.
Acton, we're working on an accessory apartment bylaw right now. And Acton has an accessory apartment bylaw that is by right. Has that doubled the town's population?
No. First of all,
how has it worked?
The accessory bylaw is, we'd never had anything like we have here. It was really in-law apartments.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, in 1998, my parents were turning 90. They'd been in Florida for 28 years. And rather than commuting when anything happened, we decided to expand our house and move my parents in with us. And it was onerous to think about putting in a kitchenette and things that change the complexion of what makes up an accessory apartment. So we had an in-law apartment bylaw. We never had really an accessory, not what you're considering here, where if you wanted to finish your basement and have access and 800 square feet or whatever it is, and 2 bedrooms and a bathroom and a kitchen, that's not something we had ever done. So it's very different. But if you want to bring in more people, I think anything that you add to your home, if you have a house here and you're adding something over here, I think it should be site plan special permit. I think if it's within your home, I think it could be by right, but you better have an enforcement officer who goes around and makes sure that the people that you want to be in that house aren't just through Airbnb or Verbo or whatever, because then you open up another whole can of worms. And when we were talking about that on one of the committees, you can promulgate all the legislation and everything else you want, but if you don't have an enforcement vehicle, then don't do it. And that costs money. You know, you need to hire someone who's going to enforce it. The same way, in the affordable housing units, you can have people in there that can destroy those units. And if you're not checking up all the time to make sure that they're in compliance, then you're going to be down one housing unit. So it's a little bit more complicated. But Acton may come to that point as the population ages, but we have a huge school-age population there. So it's very different. But the coastal part was really interesting because I was on that committee at EPA looking at the city of Boston, which could be underwater in a heartbeat. And how do you build? And what do you do now to protect the structures that, could be devastated by a Hurricane Sandy? And we're vulnerable here along the coastline. So you may not want to look up at a house, but if you're if you're just a certain distance from the shore, you better be built up, pretty high.
Questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So just a reminder of the process, to be nominated, we just need a nomination and a second, and we'll take any nominations we may have. At some point, if people feel that we're done nominating, I'll entertain a motion to close the nominations. Ms. Moran?
I'm going to nominate Mary Pat Flynn.
Okay, do we have a second?
Second.
Nomination is second for Mary Pat Flynn.
Mr. Chair,
Thank you.
I'm going to nominate Pamela Harding Barrett.
Okay, do we have a second?
I'll say.
Okay, second.
I'm going to nominate Mark Cool. Oh, sorry.
Second.
Okay.
Okay. Any other nominations? Would it be appropriate if someone would move to close nominations then?
I move we close nominations.
Second.
All those in favor of closing nominations? Say aye.
Aye.
Nominations are closed. So we have three candidates. Mary Pat Flynn, Pamela Harding Barrett, and Mark Cool. Are we prepared to make a vote, or would you like to have some discussion?
Well, I'll discuss my nomination. Over the years, I think Mr. Cool has spent the most time at our meetings and given the most input on different various subjects, of course, including wind turbines, but on other subjects as well. I thought his comments were very thoughtful, and I think he does a lot of research and he brings a lot of information to the meetings, so that's why I nominated him.
Bob?
Yeah, I've been working with Mark, or he's been attending the LCP meetings, and I really appreciate his insight. I like the way he can envision the future. And I kind of asked him to apply, so I think he's a strong candidate, and I would support him.
Okay.
What I have found, again, with Mark attending the LCP meetings in particular, where it's less formal and we do tend to chat a good bit and get a feeling for the person there, is that he is very painstaking in particular. And I guess one could say, well, that's his career showing through. But I think it's critical for what the planning board does in making decisions on plans that come before us and creating the bylaws for the town, that we have to really look at it to make sure if there are conflicts or not. And I think he would be very good at doing that.
Sam?
Yeah, I'd like to speak on behalf of Pat. Having served a couple of years with her as a selectman and knowing the depth of her experience. But there's another element that I like about Pat, and that's her reaching out to bring the community in and get it involved. Because I think it's one thing for us as boards to promulgate whatever it is that we promulgate, come down with some sort of a decision, a plan, or what have you. But it's another thing literally to communicate and bring the community along with you. And I think that's an extremely important element that we need to be more sensitive. And this whole business of educating and involving the community. I know Pam has had a similar kind of experience. The other thing I'll say is that, Pat's serving at the county level. makes her aware of resources that we should always be tapping to broaden the basis for any decisions that we make. And I think those are two extremely important qualities and attributes that Pat brings and would enhance the planning board and the current members, as much as I respect them. By the way, I want to say, this is a really tough decision.
That's for sure.
And I really thank all of the candidates who have put your paper in, because you all bring different qualities and experiences, and I hope that you'll all contribute. Whoever gets elected to this position, you'll all take the opportunity to contribute to this town and help us make the best decisions in terms of planning and zoning, regulations, bylaws, and that sort of thing. So, but thank you before I give up the floor. Thank you for adding that.
Sure. I think Sam really said it well in favor of Mary Pat. I think that, Pamela has broad experience, but I think we're moving so fast in Falmouth, and there are such critical issues, and Pamela has given her time to other boards, which I think will benefit from her input. So in my mind, I think experience is really going to count in this fast-paced planning that we're doing, both with our coastal resiliency plan, our affordable housing plan. We're really, on a launching pad, and I think long-term experience is really going to be crucial. With Mark, I've sat with him. I sat with him when I was running, and I think he, has, even though his experience is narrow, as an air traffic controller, I really appreciated his thought process and his thoroughness. I just feel that this isn't the time I just feel like this, this is just completing a particular term, and in my mind and in my, almost 30 years of experience as a lawyer, I just think that the appearance of a conflict of interest is going to be, it negates some of his assets just for this moment in time. And so that's why I think that Sam's speaking in terms of Mary Pat's long-term broad experience and just knowledge about certain assets that the county might have in addition to everything that the town has would really be the most important thing for this short-term appointment.
Megan?
So, I would just echo the appreciation of the diversity from experience, backgrounds, passions, interests, and skill sets that all four applicants bring. I think they really offered, very different perspectives, but an equal level really of commitment and interest and skill sets that all of them, would be applied well to this position. And certainly, I would echo, the comments made about Mark and Mary Pat. My particular nomination of Pamela is just that I think sometimes we tend to become a bit insular in our town. It's a lot of the same folks volunteering for a lot of the same positions. Number one, because they're passionate and they care and they have that knowledge base. I think there's an opportunity here to bring someone on board that has, while new to the town, is not new to the process by any stretch. In fact, brings significant experience, both as being formally on a planning board as well as on a board of selectmen and a number of other municipal boards and committees. She brings that experience with that outside eye for what, we are trying to appeal in some ways to outside eyes, people we want to bring into this community. And I think sometimes having that fresh view can be really helpful. And again, that combined with, it's not someone who's never been on a board before or been confronted with some of these really complex and fast-moving, as Sue says, decisions. I think she's done that. But, this is an opportunity to bring someone new in. So I think, she would really be an asset. And again, it's a short period of time, but it's an opportunity to have someone sort of give us an outside perspective. And again, regardless of what decision is made tonight, I think the planning board and the town will be well served with whomever we end up choosing.
Just a follow-up point that I think Megan sort of tangentially touched on. I've been very sensitive, since the town meeting before the most recent one we had, to, how good a job the selectmen and certainly all of the elected boards are doing in terms of doing the voters' will, serving the residents. How good a job are we doing when, you see some unrest, when people get together? And, a lot of the selectmen really had some poignant thoughts about that in terms of, should we be listening more? We've seen it recently, when the ZBA, had a different view. Ms. Kimberly Blyler's statement at town meeting, just different views on where the planning board is going, for example, on, Jim always calls it the low-lying fruit, in terms of trying to find ways to look at affordable housing and get moving on that. So I think that we're really in dire need of, sort of mediating all these, important goals and thoughts. And that's why, I think Mary Pat, with her experience both on selectmen and her desire in planning, I'm looking for, small, obvious fixes. I'm looking for opportunities where anyone in the community can feel like their voice is heard. I'm looking for opportunities where we can, be made more aware, where there are differences in maybe new ideas that we should take a look at and bring Falmouth into the future in a really careful, the comprehensive plan, I think makes a lot of sense. Coastal resiliency, the selectmen struggle, with the affordable housing issues and how to balance that. And so I think that sometimes, to actually have a physical person joining these groups might actually help all these goals come together in a more concrete way. So that's just, another reason that I just feel compelled that Mary Pat might be in a unique opportunity for the short-term appointment.
Well, I'm honored by the quality of the applicants that we have here. I mean, there's been times in my tenure that people ran unopposed for this board. And this is, in fact, Pat and I were discussing it, and she said, we have so many good people, make sure you tell them they all should run for election next year. And I said to Pat, I'm running for election next year. I don't want to run against all these people. I said, this is an incredible body, and I'm just honored that you all applied to join us. I think you all could do the job well.
So we have those four, and which is, instead of,
No, John and I will be competing against all of them. It'll be an interesting election next time.
we can't do replacements, Pat.
Indicative of the difficulty I'm having in making this decision is that, again, I want to speak on behalf of Mary Pat as well as having spoken on behalf of Mark. There's something that nobody has brought up yet, and my ancient history, being on the planning board, says that many times I can remember some of these decisions from back when and bring points out that apply on something we're considering. And I think that is something that nobody has brought out about Mary Pat, is that she has a long history not only of this town, but she has a long history with the county too, and can bring an awful lot of knowledge to bear. She was speaking about the early times of the EDIC. Well, she can bring out what can it morph into. So she's got all of this history that she can apply to moving the planning board ahead and not wasting time too.
Bob?
I think we're all a little bit conflicted because of the quality of the candidates, and I seconded Megan's nomination of Pamela because I did want to hear some discussion, because I think she's extremely qualified. There is something to being from the outside, looking at it from a different set of eyes, plus the experience that she has. So like I said, this is going to be a very tough decision, so it'll be interesting to see how this vote goes.
Are we ready to vote? Okay, we're gonna start. John? You have your three choices, Flynn, Harding-Barat, or Cool.
First of all, I would like to say that I obviously am the newest member of the planning board, and I've only been here, I think, 3 or 4 meetings. And personally, the Board of Selectmen have a vacancy. To fill that vacancy, they have to have a town election. And I personally feel that we are an elected board, and if I had my wishes, we would not be appointing a member. We would let the town vote for our vacant position. That's how I would like to see it handled, but I don't get that choice, so.
None of us do, it's done by the charter.
And obviously, all the applicants are wonderful, but I'm going to vote for Pamela.
And just to remind people, the winning candidate needs to get 6 votes out of the 10 possible voters. We only have 9 here.
We're not likely to get it on the first vote.
I know.
Right.
Doug?
I'm going to stay with Mr. Cool for now.
I'll stay with Mark.
Mark?
Mark?
Mary Pat.
Tim?
Mary Pat.
Megan?
I'm going to go with Pamela.
Okay. And I'm going with Mary Pat. So we have Mark Cool with 4 votes, Mary Pat Flynn with 3 votes, and Pamela Harding-Barat with 2 votes. So we don't have 6 votes. The appropriate thing is if we entertain a motion to withdraw someone from the nomination, and we re-vote after that point.
I'm going to move to withdraw Pamela. Just, I've sat with her. I think she's visionary. I think that she's taken on a couple of other boards in town, and I'm grateful for her bringing all of her expertise. And I just think she might be in a better position to run as opposed to filling this short-term need.
Okay, so we have a motion to
Second.
withdraw. And second. Further discussion? All those in favor of removing Pamela from the ballot, say aye.
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 Opposed?
I'll oppose.
And 3 opposed. So we have 6 to 3 to remove her. So we now have Mary Pat Flynn and Mark Cool on our ballot. I'm going to start over here. Megan?
I'm going to vote with Mary Pat. I thought we might just get her to volunteer regardless, because she's just like that. But
She keeps it, she is.
Yes,
She is.
She's amazing. I'm going to go with Mary Pat, please.
Sam?
Mary Pat.
Mary Pat.
Jim?
Mark, cool.
Mark?
Mark.
I'll stay with Mark again.
Mark?
And I'm going with Mark Cool. So Mark Cool has been elected as our new member of the planning board, term ending May 2017, at which point we'll have another election.
And I want to say thank you to Mr. Haddad as well. I'm sorry we didn't nominate you tonight, but certainly not any,
Thank you.
thank you.
Congrats.
And so just to be clear, it was a vote of 6 to 3 to appoint Mark Cool as a representative to the planning board.
Great.
Thank you very much. Thank all of you.
And I'd like to add on to what Jim said. I really hope we see names on the ballot, so it's not just a number that has to be elected. That's too frequently what it is. And you might as well not have an election then, unless you have a choice.
And we have an open meeting every Wednesday with the local comprehensive plan where a lot of work is done. And we can use all the help we can get there, and you can really get an insight of where things are going. So it's our working session. It's kind of a blue sky session that we do, but we'd encourage anyone that's interested. I mean, I learned a lot working with Pat at those sessions, so just lay that out there.
Entertain a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We're adjourned.
Thank you all.